Hello, good day, everyone. So today I'm going to report uh, about the colonial and postcolonial critique, the challenge from world Englishes. So the role of English in the constructions of colonial, particularly British discourse and postcolonial critique. So according to the introduction, so the focus of this chapter will be considered the role of English in the constructions of colonial, particular British discourse and postcolonial critique. So the colonial discourse and postcolonial critique, so it is a settlement, so in a new country, a body of people who settle in a new locality, forming a community subjects to or connected with. So their parent state, the community so formed, consisting of the original settlers and their descendants and successors. So the absence of a mention of indigenous populations that mentioned above in the definition signals. So there are two important aspects in the study of colonialism. First, it elides the sometimes benign but all too often violent encounters between cultures that disrupted change, and in some cases even erased the cultural traditions of the people who already inhabited this place or these places. So the changes mentioned above then are not simply the effects of time and travel, but are the brought about by the instruments of economic and political power. So second, the illusions of local peoples, language, and culture marks the definition itself part of the dominant discourse which post-colonial critics seeks to note and correct. So the area of colonial discourse proper, in which historical and literary and anthropological text with sensitivity to difference and the pragmatics of meaning and colonial critique and literary resistance develop. So the focus insight about the nature and the role of critique is the formation of the liberal political institutions of the West and to embrace international relations by making the world a text. So the Orientalism and the world Englishes. So Orientalisms mark a paradigm shift in thinking about the relations between the West and the non-Western world. So as an outgrowth of post-structuralism, the critique of Orientalism intersects with the broad intellectual movement consisting the homogeneity and essentialism, which Enlightenment humanistic values was said to assume. So next, a return to liberal humanism. So liberal comprises the core values of justice, freedom, and equality. So thus, when they consider the varieties of English spoken around the world, we can expect an increasing insistence on maintaining accents and syntactic construction tied to particular ways of life, not only in spoken English but also in written English. A focus on the varieties of English used throughout the world with increasingly robust literary traditions reminds us that regardless of differences or difference, we are bound by a global language. So next, the cultural linguistic complexity. So the dominant approach of a critic international language education increasingly carried on English and based on Edward Said's concept of Orientalism. So keeps in focus that the very many ways from the psychological through the linguistic to the legal, so that individuals are excluded from full participations within national and international cultures. So the demands for equity among diverse users of English in the classroom, the curriculum, and the wider society. So in these views, culture is not merely a set of settled practices constitutive of people and their beliefs and preferences. So, but rather takes on a mystical force in making of the self. So, next is the challenge of the world Englishes. So, the concept of world English also undercuts the claim that the global spread of language such as English or of specific variety such as American English would necessarily affect the homogeneizations of the language used. So, Michelle Moody Adams, 1997, argues that first, an idealizations of group cultures can be found in the discourse of the both those outside a group as well as those who are members. Second, that the idealizations of cultural groups often turns on making a distinction between modern and traditional cultures. The former are taken to be dynamic, differentiated, and open-ended, and the latter stagnant and closed. So, thus, we see arguments for teaching language skills to Chinese students in a manner that would enable more imaginative, creative, and independent approaches to language learning, even as researchers note the parsimony of the Chinese morphophonic system. So, even when that tied to a Hegelian view of world history, notions of traditional culture suggest that their members have holistic system of meaning tied to a seamless web of beliefs and lead either to an unreflective universalistic metaphysics of meaning. So this is not to say that there have been no attempts to break this division between us and them within liberalism. So this is to state the freedom or the will of the postcolonials. So next is the world English is against relativism. Relativism positions are inadmissible in this account since they rest on taking languages and cultures as being bounded and homogeneous. It has not been noted enough that traditional cultures are varied and differentiated. So, the relativism or relativist might argue it is difficult to deny that there are some practices so alien from our standpoint and yet so accepted with a certain cultures or culture with which we can have only national confrontation. So English movement which merged in the late 80s and through the 1990s to the last century, at the very last, the taking up of such arguments based on the recognition of relationality between language varieties and the complexity of cultures would indicate that we look at how the practices of judgment tied to a power might result in increase in practice that make the already educationally vulnerable even more so. So, next is beyond Orientalism. In other words, relativistic views of linguistic and cultural practice, both Western and non-Western, so that rest on division between us and them. So, first, we would be called on to scrutinize positions ever more closely in order to determine whether any unknowledged sense of moral supremacy lurks within such a relativism. Second, we would need to educate ourselves more thoroughly in the traditions whose practices are in question in order to find ways to making alliances with members of such culture who uphold conservative values. So, these are the hypocritical these are the hypocritical denial of ethical responsibilities or responsibility. Second, the political responsibility and intellectual responsibility, social and cultural responsibility. So a critic along these lines would demand that we familiarize ourselves with linguistic traditions varying in their respect for the moral system that guide linguistic action. So next is a culture studies and discursive constructions of the word. So culture is one of the 2 or 3 most complicated words in the English language. So we will discuss the cultural studies of discursive, no, about the Englishes. So first, the cultural studies and other discipline. Literary theory and anthropological texts, literary style and figurality, and anthropology as cultural critics. That was in 1986. Today, a literary theory has come to dominate the intellectual landscape of these countries as never before, shaping a variety of academic disciplines ranging from anthropological to legal studies. So it becomes a legal studies even applied to an academic study. So the historian has to interpret his material in order to construct the moving patterns of images in which the form of the historical process is to mirrored, no. On the other hand, there are always more facts in the record that the historians can possibly include the narrative representations of a given segment of the historical process, and so the historian must interpret his data by including certain facts from his account of some event of complex of events as irrelevant to his narrative purpose. So cultural studies and anthology of world Englishes. So this portion is the concept of, or the ideology of the language. So the concept of power first. So along with the notions of ideology is pivotal to many innovative works of scholarship associated with cultural studies. So the significance of the concept of power and ideology in the understanding of a nature of Englishes has been pointed out by a number of scholars in recent times. So there are a number of sub-themes connected to power, ideology, and language that need to be explored in greater depth. The diverse ways in which creative writers, poets, novelists, and dramatists seek to subvert English language in gestures of defense and defiance and self-assertion deserves careful considerations. So, as you see here, there is passages, no, that is giving an example of, or an ideology work of Salman Rushdie in 1982. So made the comment. He made also the comment about language. So that the cultures are to be more than. So given more than, not just and applicable to, according to the context here, is the English offers an more than interesting insights into the which power and ideology work. So this passages anyway from Raha's The Satanic Verses from Raha Rao's Kantapura, no, Asikan from Salman. So this is a form of English. He write in English. So as you see here, there's many contexts that this English is, ideally merged by cultures. So next, the word Englishes and the transitionalization. So the word Englishes has transformed, in localism and globalism and the territorialization. Sorry. So